Welcome to the next installment of the Train Vicar. Today I want to talk about these freight trains that go past the church and breakdown of the halls. I've noticed that in recent months they have become a bit shorter, so today I want to look into why that might be.
The main North Line connects Christchurch with Picton. Some freight goes from Christchurch to Blenheim and from there on to Nelson, but most of the freight on these trains then goes on to Picton and from Picton to Wellington by ferry and from there throughout the North Island. Southbound freight also mainly comes from the North Island before it goes onto the trains to Christchurch. It may be possible that these shorter trains have got something to do with the winter low season, or that KiwiRail has lost a significant number of customers in recent months. But more likely it has got something to do with the ferry connection between the North Island and the South Island. And indeed, a few things have been happening there recently. Just a quick historical look back. The roll-on, roll-off ferry service for rail and road between Picton and Wellington was introduced in 1962. When the Aramoana entered service. It was operated by the Union Steamship Company on behalf of the Railway Department. The service was a success, and in 1966, the Aranui, the second ship, entered service. New Zealand Railways took over the operation of the service in 1970. In 1972, the new ship Arahanga entered service on the Cook Strait. And then in 1974, the ship Aratika came onto the service, which was later enlarged. For most of the 1970s, there were 4 ferries operating between Wellington and Picton. All of these ships would carry freight railway wagons as well as trucks and cars and also passengers. In 1983, the Arahura replaced the first 2 ferries, the Aramoana and the Aranui. In 1989, the operation was renamed the Inter-Islander. Together with the rest of New Zealand Rail, it was privatised in 1993 and then became part of Transrail. Under Transrail, a new ferry, the Aratere, entered service in 1999. It also was a road and rail ferry with passenger accommodation. It replaced the Aratika. In the meantime, there was some competition on the Cook Strait. In 1992, Strait Shipping launched a very basic ferry service between the islands, mainly to transport animals and freight. This was further consolidated in 1995 when the second ship entered service. Finally, in 2002, Strait Shipping launched its successful, fully fledged ferry service, which carried both freight and private vehicles as well as passengers. This service was called Blue Bridge and was launched with the ship Santa Regina. In 2006, a second ship, the Monticello, was added. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, Inter-Islander and several competitors also had fast ferries. But with the speed of the ferries being restricted in the ecologically sensitive Marlborough Sounds, such services ceased in 2005. After the Inter-Islander had taken the Arahanga out of service in 2001, it chartered a ferry that was not rail-equipped, the Purbeck, and it did that from 2003 to 2006. In 2005, it also chartered quite a large ferry, which it renamed the Kaitaki, and it later bought that ship. This ferry also was not rail-enabled, and it's still in service today. In 2008, the Arahura was rebuilt to enable it to carry more dangerous cargo and fewer passengers by removing some of the accommodation. It just shows that moving trucks became more and more the core business of the Inter-Islander. In 2008, the ferry service together with rail services returned to state control. Inter-Islander became a division of KiwiRail. To set KiwiRail on a commercial footing, the government agreed to the lengthening of the newest ferry, the Aratere. It could now carry more freight. In 2013, the Stena Allegra was chartered to cover the Aratere while it was out of service. The ship was added to the fleet permanently with the new name KiwiRail in 2015. That year, the Arahura was taken out of service. The KiwiRail also is not rail-enabled, and so the Aratere remains the only ship that could carry rail vehicles across Cook Strait. In the meantime, Strait Shipping had also modernized its fleet. Today it operates the sister ships Connemara and Livia, which it bought second-hand. In 2018, Inter-Islander started a process of looking at its Cook Strait ferries and ordering new ships. It decided to order 2 large rail-enabled ferries that would require new wharves, but could move more freight and people and more efficiently as well. In 2021, a very good contract for 2 ships was signed with HD Hyundai Mipo in Korea. However, costs of the new terminals began to increase, particularly as engineers believed they had to build them to new earthquake resilience standards. Nevertheless, construction contracts were signed and, construction started happening. The ships would definitely be available by 2026 and hopefully the terminals also. In late 2023, a new government came to power in New Zealand. It wanted to show that it was financially prudent and cancelled the project due to the cost blowout. Well, it didn't help that the government is led by the National Party, which traditionally does not like rail and receives a lot of political donations from the road transport industry. Ministers of the national government argued that it would study the issues and suggested standard ferries that were not rail-enabled. But one of the coalition parties, New Zealand First, was not happy with that. It pushed to have rail-enabled ferries. Under pressure from New Zealand First, the government set up a special government company, Ferry Holdings Limited, to procure new ferries. These are 2 smaller ferries that will be rail-enabled and will be built in China. Now, having these smaller ferries requires less work on the wharves, and also they won't be so earthquake resilient. To make the construction work easier and cheaper, it was decided to retire the only rail-enabled ferry, the Aratere, in August 2025. Since then, railway vehicles normally cannot be moved on the ferries, though a few have been moved by putting them on low loaders. That is a situation that will last until 2029. Containers are still moved across the Cook Strait by putting them on road trailers in Wellington or Picton while they go on the ferry. So north and south of that they go by rail. That is not as easy as putting whole wagons on the ferry. So the transshipment requires extra handling and extra cost. I thought that this would result in shorter trains between Christchurch and Picton as freight moved from rail to road. After all, rail was now at a disadvantage. But I was wrong. The operations must have been quite efficient, because in late 2025 and early 2026, the freight trains that ran past St. Paul's were longer than before. The extra handling can't have dented the demand for rail freight, and as fuel prices increased, it seemed rail was the answer for moving freight economically. KiwiRail even put on an extra southbound train several days a week, even though this was often only hauled by 1 locomotive instead of the normal 2 locomotives. This extra train allowed containers to be taken from Picton sooner so that they wouldn't build up there. But then from late June 2026, the trains reduced in size significantly. What had happened there? Well, from late June to late September, Inter-Islander will operate with only 1 ferry. First, the KiwiRail underwent maintenance in Wellington, and now the Kaitaki is in dry dock in Singapore. Of course, KiwiRail would have organised that the maintenance of the ships is happening during a quiet season, but still the constrained ferry capacity does affect freight volumes by rail. It's not only rail customers that are affected. Trucking companies too are complaining that there's not enough space on the ferries. KiwiRail has organised New Zealand Connect, a service from Auckland to Christchurch via ship. That means that KiwiRail takes containers from its freight yard in South Auckland to the port of Auckland, puts it on an international ship that then takes the containers to Lyttelton, and from there KiwiRail moves it to Christchurch. But that's not as convenient as taking freight by train. Everything is connected, even if KiwiRail now has new locomotives. These are of limited use if there's not enough ferry capacity. Clearly, in future, KiwiRail will have to organize better cover so that freight keeps on moving between the islands and so that trains can then continue to transport freight. So I believe I found the reason why the trains going past St. Paul's are shorter now. It is because there are fewer ferries on Cook Strait, and particularly with the inter-island. Therefore, KiwiRail can't ship as much freight between the North and South Islands. That affects many of its trains. The ferry is closely integrated with the rail network in New Zealand, and if one doesn't really work, then it has consequences for the other. It means that the whole system won't be able to do its job. As the train vicar, I often draw parallels to the life of faith. Clearly, something similar can also be seen in our personal lives. We may be doing some things really well, but if we have problems or shortcomings in another part of our lives, then it affects us as a whole. Recently, I have read about the English writer Hannah More, who campaigned along William Wilberforce and others in the late 18th and early 19th century to abolish slavery. She frequently told people that it was not enough to be respectable, to give to charity and to go to church if we don't follow that up in action. Faith needs to run through our whole lives, not just be a religion which we use for our social acceptability. If we do that, then charity and church going and everything else is just like a shell and not really worth it.